Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I got a little bit of a treat ski and hutch for everybody. I got Robbie Martin from MediaRoots.org, an amazing independent organization that has been around for quite some time. He's going to join me, and we are going to talk John Walker Lindh. Now, if you're unfamiliar with John Walker Lindh and other important matters, now's the time to go to MediaRoots.org, hit that little star button up there, and you'll favorite it, and then you can get real news. It's really cool. That's what I tell you to do with my channel. You come over here, you go to the videos section, and you just hit the star. You don't need notifications. You come back 3-4 times a day, and everything's a gravy train with biscuit wheels. You get actual information. So who is John Walker Lindh? Well, in my generation, Robbie, he was painted up as a vicious Al-Qaeda fighter fighting with the Taliban on the ground after the horrifying attacks of 9/11. And in a very different world where Twitter doesn't exist and most people on the internet can barely get a 56K dial-up speed for video, you pretty much had to go by what the TV told us. And CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and every other network out there was telling us this was a vicious traitor who had betrayed his country and sided with the terrorists. Who is John Walker Lindh, Robbie?
I mean, he has a really interesting backstory. I mean, he defected. He never renounced his U.S. citizenship. He never actually came out and said anything like the U.S. military is the great Satan or anything like that. He was from Marin County, from a relatively well-off family. Upper class, middle to upper class family. And he decided to defect, to renounce, I believe, his Catholicism at the time and to convert to Islam. I'm not sure how he actually got into Islam in the first place, but this sort of led him on sort of a spiritual journey where, in a lot of ways, it kind of almost resembles a lot of people's from the Bay Area sort of spiritual journey where they get, fixated on some kind of religion in a foreign country. They travel there, kind of like a pilgrimage. I almost see him as kind of like a, well-to-do kind of a hippie guy that got kind of fascinated by Islam. And in his journey, he made several stops along the Middle East. First, he went to Yemen, I believe in 1998. And then he eventually trained with some militia in Pakistan. And then he made his way over to Afghanistan in, I believe, May of 2001. So what's interesting is it's possible that John Walker Lindh, being separated completely from society, I mean, you have to imagine in Afghanistan around 2001, you don't have access to the internet, you don't have access to television, probably not even a radio. So even the idea that he was even aware that 9/11 happened, I would assume he probably actually didn't know until after it happened, when the Northern Alliance started to basically launch attacks on Taliban strongholds in Afghanistan. But as you know, Jason, and if people who remember the post 9/11 era, he basically had the book thrown at him. Jesslyn Raddick, who I spoke to about this case, constitutional lawyer, I believe she also represented Thomas Drake and maybe even Edward Snowden at one point. But she was saying it's basically the way that the John Ashcroft and the U.S. Justice Department went after him was like taking a sledgehammer to a minnow. It was obviously designed to make an example out of him. And not just to make an example out of him and to warn other people not to do this, but it was also designed, I believe, to create a hysteria in this country that the terrorists could be among us, that it's not just someone from Afghanistan coming over here to hurt us, is that your neighbor could potentially be a terrorist. Even even your white guy hippie neighbor in Marin County could be a terrorist.
And let me just stop you there. The new cell is the ISIS bride, or ISIS could be among us. We're radicalizing people here, but that was the cell there. This is it, Absolutely. American Taliban. And this was kind of like that American jihadist 1.0. It's kind of gone through several different reiterations with the shoe bomber, and then you had the underwear bomber, and all these people that were joining the game outside of the Middle East that were sympathizing with the terrorists. This is the OG of that. And now, about a little over a month ago, when they released him, he said, I didn't even equate jihad with terrorism. That's not how I was taught. And he does kind of come across, especially when you see the photographs of him before and after and now, as what was a trust fund kid who now has spent, I believe it was 17 years, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And a lot of people in the establishment and elsewhere are saying that he should basically be in prison indefinitely and have the key thrown away. What people don't fundamentally understand here is that this was an attempt by the U.S. Justice Department, almost like a pilot attempt to prosecute someone not under the guise of being an enemy combatant. So what they did here was, instead of throwing him into a legal limbo, like they decided to do to pretty much any enemy fighter, which included Taliban, Al-Qaeda, any Iraqi insurgent that was fighting against the U.S. military, they were stripped of their POW status. This is something I'm sure a lot of your listeners already know. But in the case of John Walker Lindh, they didn't treat him as an enemy combatant, which basically would have stripped him of all legal rights. And they also did not treat him as a prisoner of war, which gives you more legal rights and sort of more protections under international law. But one of the interesting things in my discussion with Jesselyn Raddick that was sort of brought up with the prisoner of war declaration is that prisoner of war declaration means that you can be detained for as long as the conflict is still going. So even if there was a prisoner of war declaration made for any of the fighters in Afghanistan, they could all still be held right now, because technically that's not over yet. So in some weird, twisted way, he actually got a better deal out of this, in the sense that he went through the regular U.S. justice system. However, John Ashcroft basically charged him with ridiculous, over-the-top charges, which include conspiracy to murder U.S. citizens or nationals, 2 counts of providing material support and resources to terrorist organizations, 1 count of supplying services to the Taliban, conspiracy to contribute services to Al-Qaeda, contributing services to Al-Qaeda, conspiracy to supply services to the Taliban, and using and carrying firearms and destructive devices during crimes of violence. Most of those charges under scrutiny just don't simply hold up. It's also unclear which organization he was actually a part of. Was he actually working for the Taliban at the time? Or was he actually an Al-Qaeda fighter of some kind? Most of the evidence points to him being a very low level, basically an employee of the Taliban. He wasn't skilled. He had very poor Arabic speaking abilities. He could barely understand Arabic. So you'd have to imagine an American guy going over there. I mean, they're not going to put him on the front lines of combat. These people are very serious people, regardless of what you think about them. So most of the evidence points to him being either a chef or basically a doorman, a door guard, which in the Taliban at the time, that was like the lowest level possible position you could have.
And they painted it up that he had been in Pakistan, possibly training militarily just prior to this. But people have to understand, when this all went down, he's 20 years old. He's 38 right now, okay? When everything happened, he was 20 years old. And let's reiterate this. It is unclear on what any level he had to do with the Taliban, let alone Al-Qaeda. And on top of that, the strikes. We don't know whether his village was just raided. What we do know is we lost a lot of civilians in Afghanistan, and we packed up a lot of goat herders behind fences and accused them of being terrorists. And down the line, we named every single able-bodied man 16 years and older an enemy combatant. So you painted a broad brush of bullshit against anybody who was supposedly the enemy. And, Mike Pompeo saying, and I quote, "There is something deeply troubling and wrong about this," kind of turns my stomach. We both know this guy is not a threat. Now that he's been released, he isn't coming over as an Arab agent of Islam and jihadism, and he's not going to report back to the terrorists and give them intel, or he's not going to blow something up here. It's just insane to me, as this is what we focus on as a people, yet a man who actually shot the president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, walks around a free man. We don't talk about that. A guy who literally tried to kill the president walks around a free man in this country, and we had a guy who was confused, who wasn't even old enough to drink in this country, caught up in a war he didn't know was happening, and he ends up serving 17 years in prison and having to apologize up and down for everything he did prior. It's pretty insane.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. And just as an example of how disproportionate and how much they threw the book at him specifically, because he was an American guy, white guy, I think, that became Taliban, or that worked for the Taliban. So it was really easy to sort of hoist him up and make this crazy example out of him. But just as a counterpoint, there was actually a guy who was Arabic nationality, named Yashir Hamdi, who was captured around the exact same time John Walker Lindh was. He was also an American citizen who was caught up in, or just working for the Taliban in Afghanistan. It was actually litigated through the court, and it actually got a hearing by the Supreme Court, and he was released in 2004. So that's just a counterpoint to someone caught up basically in the same raid, accused of similar things. They didn't really find it useful to make an example out of this guy for some reason. So he got released fairly soon after he got detained. Lindh was not so lucky. And part of the reason why I think that they were able to really throw the book at him is he never renounced Islam. He would always sort of double down on his allegiance to the religion. He initially was basically escaped a prison break that the Northern Alliance captured a bunch of alleged Taliban fighters. He was one of the people to escape. Now, from what we know about his training and his Arabic speaking abilities, it makes no sense what the CIA basically accused him of later, which was that he led the prison break. They're claiming that John Walker Lindh rallied all the Taliban prisoners to break out of the prison, which resulted in the death of a CIA interrogator. One of the CIA interrogators on this team, one of the first group of people into Afghanistan before American soldiers, basically interrogated him without Mirandizing him.
And let's stop for a second.
As an American citizen, so technically should get Mirandized and have a lawyer present if he asked for one, which they did not provide to him. They actually told him there are no lawyers in Afghanistan. And that's a quote that's come out in the trial.
And how arrogant and ethnocentric are we to believe that the American led all the Taliban to break those? They all looked up to the American in prison. When it was him, they said, you know what? That's it. We're going to break. I mean, the storybook bullshit that is promoted to us, and the majority of the people who are just not awake, who don't care to look beyond left or right, or the talking points of Rush Limbaugh on one side or Rachel Maddow on the other, they believe this horse shit. And, I think this is ultimately kind of a win in the sense that he's not going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But I think that the ignorance of it and the fact that it barely made headlines, and the things that the officials who are in power right now trying to propagate a war with Iran are saying are not good, Robbie. So I'm going to give you the last word to wrap it up of the significance of this, and anything else you'd like to say.
Yeah, I mean, one of the unfortunate things, Jason, is when he's being released, his ability to sort of acclimate back into society and become like a functioning member of society is being sabotaged by the same U.S. government, hysterics that put him in prison in the first place. There was this counterterrorism task force that actually leaked private chats that he had in prison to make it appear that he is still some kind of a terrorist, even though the justice system and all the people who are monitoring him, you have to imagine, a lot of the people who are in this system, in the prison system, the people that are determining his early release, they're not like liberal lefties, bleeding heart liberals. They're probably just as paranoid about terrorism as anybody else is, but they've deemed that he's okay to release now. So for the basically the U.S. government is trying to sabotage it by releasing leaked documents claiming that he still has sympathies for Al Qaeda and even ISIS now. Now, my take on that is, first of all, these are leaked to smear him as he's getting released, and then second of all, as far as I last checked, even if that is true, that's not illegal. I mean, as an American citizen, you have the right to be sympathetic to whatever horrible ideas you want to be. That's part of what protects you under the First Amendment. So if we're now saying that someone should be kept indefinitely in prison because they've expressed sympathies to ISIS, that's a law I've never heard of. And I would like to just end by saying, as egregious or as ugly as people think that might be, it's technically not illegal, and it shouldn't be, if you believe in the First Amendment. Now, if you go and start advocating for violence and you say, go hurt this person or go to this place and hurt these people, then yeah, that's not a protected under the First Amendment. But if he's just merely saying, hey, I have sympathies for what their their cause is or whatever, I don't see anything wrong with that. But on top of that, also, Jason, he's
let me say this.
monitored.
I don't think there's any. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that. We're saying legally there's no precedent. Yeah. You know what I mean? Listen, you can have abhorrent ideas. We've always talked about how more speech is better speech. And you, the viewers, guys, I look at my analytics. Guess what? You're not fucking children. In fact, I only have from like 18 to 24. I think it's 2%. We're all adults here. We should talk to each other like adults. There should be an ongoing, idea pool. It's crazy. You can have a disagreement with me, and people can say some disgusting bullshit. Well, that shows how valid their other arguments are as well. So you really just reveal yourself more and more. We shouldn't be against more speech, no matter how abhorrent. I want to let people know that Robbie Martin is at Fluorescent Gray and has a great Twitter. He's feisty. He's a little feistier than I am on the Twitter. So if you want some feisty Twitter, you go over there, you follow him. MediaRoots.org is the place. I'm putting out 4, 5, 6, 7 videos a day. This is video number 5, guys. And guess what? It'll be video number 5 today that'll be demonetized. As you can see behind me, my last 6 videos are all demonetized. One confirmed by manual review. I gotta admit, I don't have a lot of hopes for any of them except for maybe the North Korea one. We'll see what happens. That's why I need you to subscribe. Hit the thumbs up button, share it, and run those notifications. Get out there and be the change you want to see in the world, and support independent media like myself and Robbie Martin. That's why I have this awesome little GoFundMe going, guys. Thank you so much. We're almost halfway there, and I've only had this up for about 2 weeks. We're going to do it every month. If we can make that $5,000 goal every month, it's big ups. We can go bigger. I can go somewhere. Somebody's like, oh, you can do that. Listen, if I go somewhere for like 3 to 5 days, who's watching the kids? That costs money. Flights are not free. I'd love to stay on couches, but even like scumbag hotel rooms, you're talking about a $500 to $1,500 trip a month. I'd like to eat. That's all. I mean, am I looking chubby, guys? I don't know. You tell me. Robbie, you do great work. I appreciate you, man. I love having you on, and we're going to have him on more and more about all sorts of different subjects. Remember to come back here at 9 p.m. Eastern, where I will have James Corbett of the Corbett Report on everything China. We'll see you on the flip, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, dude. You still there?